Good afternoon. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I'm Robert Viscusi. I'm the chair of the planning committee for the Robert L. Hess Scholar in Residence program. This is a program that is endowed in the name of the president of Brooklyn College, basically during the 1980s, who did a great deal of good for this school and passed away rather young. He was only 58 when he died. And his relatives and friends contributed to make a fairly substantial endowment that allows us to invite every year or two a distinguished writer or scholar or practitioner of the arts to come and spend a week here talking to people in many different programs for many different kinds of classes. We spent a lot of time organizing this to get the right classes of people who could be interested and can benefit from the expertise and experience of our guests. Our guest this year is Thomas Frank, who is, we define him on this program, which you have a copy of, I believe, as an historian, a political analyst, and a journalist, and I'm sure we could add other things.
Troublemaker.
Troublemaker. Do you play cricket?
No, I was never big on cricket. You don't want to know what my sport is. Croquet.
Croquet. A well-known croqueteer in the environs of the District of Columbia. Do they call them croqueteers? What do they call them? I don't even know. We have a professor in the philosophy department who is from India and who writes books about cricket, and I understand they're quite good. But I can't read them because I don't understand how cricket is played. I've watched it many times and I still can't figure it out. I'm hoping he'll take me to a game one day and explain it to me. It's not a game? What do you mean? You don't call them games. Well, you are an English professor, yes. Anyway, Mr. Frank has written maybe a half dozen books you've published by now?
I think it's 5.
Close to half a dozen. He's about to publish another one,
Yeah.
so then he'll have 6. And he's also a journalist of great distinction. He's been practicing for a long time, and he's gotten to be quite good at it. We called this session listening to what people actually say, because one of the things that really distinguishes him is he writes history of contemporary events, and he interviews people who are protagonists in contemporary events, political theorists, political actors of one kind and another, cultural protagonists. And he takes the things that they say seriously, even when he doesn't agree with them, which makes him, I think, in many respects, quite unusual among political commentators. So that's what he's going to talk about a little bit, and I think that you will all perhaps want to ask him questions. Do you want to add anything to this, Professor Napoli?
No, I think that the microphone. I'm very pleased to have you here. I thank you for coming and sharing your time with us. This is a group of people who are very interested in paying attention to the people we talk to, because for all of us as oral historians, we understand ourselves to be the students of the people we speak with. They have something to teach us, and we're anxious to hear what you have to share with us.
Okay. I give you Thomas Frank.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's awfully nice of you to invite me here.
It's good to have you here. I'm going to go sit in the audience. So
okay. Should I move over? I'll move over one seat. Just to throw the camera off, just to make things tough for Jonathan back there. So I don't do much oral history anymore, but I do interview people all the time. And what Mr. Viscusi said is exactly right. I often interview people who I disagree with really profoundly, but there's always something there that you didn't expect. There's always something to, at the end of the day, our loyalty is to history rather than to some, ideological, position or something like that. And so there's always something good. Now, I did used to do what I considered straight up oral history when I was writing about the 1960s. I wrote a book about the advertising industry in the 50s and 60s. It's a great subject. They should make it into a TV show, is what I've always said. And and a lot of the actors from that period were still alive at the time. A lot of them still are alive today, but I mean, I swear every time I read the obits page of the New York Times, there's another one has passed on. But, and a lot of them were very happy to talk to me about what they had done in what they considered their, golden age in the 50s and 60s. Some of them didn't want to talk to me, but almost everyone I contacted did. And I also discovered while I was doing this that, and this is kind of a funny thing, the Library of Congress had a really remarkable collection of. They had done their own oral history of certain ad campaigns in the 50s and 60s. For example, the Marlboro ad campaign. So they interviewed everybody that worked on Marlboro advertising, advertising for Marlboro cigarettes in those days. The one that really got me was Pepsi. They'd interviewed everyone associated with Pepsi advertising in the 50s and 60s. And they had tape recorded all these interviews and then done nothing with them. And so they were just sitting there in the did I say Library of Congress? I meant Smithsonian, in the National Museum of American History down in Washington. And so I went there and listened to these things for hours and hours and hours. It was wonderful. And they also had videotapes of all the ads, of all the TV commercials that the people were talking about on the tapes, which today is it's much easier to research old advertising today. It's all on YouTube now. But back then, you had to go to the museum and a lot of different museums all over the country and look at this stuff. But how do you guys want to talk about this? You tell me. This is how we do oral history. Come on now.
Well, let's start with Phil, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, can you talk to us about the problem with objectivity in the review?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in graduate school, there was a book that came out about historical objectivity called That Noble Dream. And it's actually a lot of, it was an influential book with us at the time, and I think people are still reading it. It's a good book, and you should take a look at it. But what I concluded at the time, and maybe people are still concluding this today, is that perfect objectivity is impossible. And this was, at the time I was, I wanted to study cultural and intellectual history. I somehow got involved in political history by accident. But I wanted to do cultural and intellectual history, and the sort of red-hot thinkers at the time that everybody was interested in was, Foucault and Derrida. And a handful of others as well. You had Stanley Fish here in America. You had what was his name at Yale? Later got in so much trouble. You know who I'm thinking of in the French department. Paul de Man, yeah. And what I took away from reading these guys, or trying to read these guys, I should say, is that that there is no place of perfect objectivity. That there is no place that you can stand that is not influenced by other factors. And the important thing is to take that into account and more or less admit it up front, and then and try to do your best, and also to you want to be fair with your sources, and you want to be honest about what you're told and what you discover. And it's also, I've always found it's important, and this is I don't know how many people have figured this out. I imagine everyone, but when you find things that don't confirm your thesis, to make sure you mention them, and bring that into the conversation and work your way around it, because you have to, that's what's going to make, rather than having something completely driven by a hypothesis where everything is just conforms to your predetermined view. Your work changes as you go forward with the research, and that's it's going to make whatever you write 100 times better. Always take into account the things that you didn't expect. That's the best stuff. The stuff that you did expect, it's like, who cares?
Could you give us an example of where that happened to you?
Yeah, I will. By the I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Well, I'm trying to think about the advertising book here. I mean, when you go into something, a project like this, what did I know about advertising? I knew about it what I had read in various memoirs and secondhand accounts and movies. There was advertising was kind of a glamour subject in the 50s and 60s. There's a lot of novels about it, really kind of dreadful novels, but a lot of them. And I'd read a bunch of these, and as you go forward with it, you discover that it's not the subject that you thought it was going to be at all, that it's in fact a different kind of thing. And we'll think of examples as we go along, but it turned out to be completely different than what I expected going in. I talk too much. Okay, let's go have lunch.
No. How does oral history affect the general history narrative?
Well, probably not as much as it should. It probably should affect it more. When I was coming up, this is a class in social history, and social history was the coming discipline, or so we thought. This was the kind of history that we thought everybody was going to be doing someday. Digging into the lives of ordinary people, and finding out how ordinary people lived their lives at distant times. But instead, now, as looking back as an adult, I see that it's still political history in the saddle, and a kind of history that that I. Often written by journalists that I don't particularly like. I'm reading a book of it right now called Obama's Time. I shouldn't knock it down. I haven't finished the book yet. Maybe it'll turn out to be really awesome. But that's still regarded as the pinnacle of the discipline. And I think that oral history is not. People don't spend enough time with it, with interviewing subjects, and Lord knows there's plenty of it out there. I keep talking to everybody about these presidential libraries that I've been to. And, researchers have just scratched the surface of what is in these. I was at the Herbert Hoover Library. Now, this is unfortunate the Herbert Hoover Library doesn't have much by way of oral histories, but they let me back into the stacks of this thing, and it is unbelievable. And, the stuff that's back there, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's not online, It may be like 100 years from now after they scan everything. It's going to take them decades and decades to do it. But the amount of stuff that's out there in the archives waiting for you to find it is, enormous. They're right now. They're slowly releasing stuff from the Clinton administration, and it's all surprising. The stuff that comes out, and we're just scratching the surface. And they do have interviews at places like that, lots and lots and lots of them. You know what else? People will talk to you when they find out when they understand that you're serious and you're going to treat them fairly. People are happy to tell you about what they did as historical actors. People are psyched to do that.
A couple of questions have popped up in the movie. Go ahead.
Along with that, I think that as you were talking, what's interesting about oral history is those narratives or lives of sort of regular folks as historical actors. But it seems like that's like you said, you listening to all those interviews with folks who worked on the ad campaigns.
Well, those aren't really regular people.
Those aren't regular, but in that sort of those extended interviews, that when you write that for a broader audience, it gets transformed into sort of it has to be condensed, or what happens to that oral history when it becomes archival material or source material for written social history.
Right, and it's there's say there's an interview with some ad executive from the BBDO agency from the mid '60s talking about a Pepsi campaign, and it goes on for 2 hours. And how much of that are you actually going to use? Well, not very much. Just a tiny little bit. That fits into your what it is, whatever it is that you're writing about. I was really interested in Pepsi at one time, but yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I really understood what you were asking me.
Thanks for coming. It's really great to have you here this whole week.
It's my pleasure. I've always wanted to see Brooklyn.
Well, yeah, this is a wonderful part of Brooklyn for sure, and you get to see a lot of it just in the faces of the students and staff and faculty on campus. I want to go back to the question about objectivity, because I'm a fan of your work, and I think of you as somebody who writes with a kind of edge, with almost in a polemical style in moments.
Oh, I do. I mean,
yeah.
I write op-eds. That's what they are.
And so, I mean, that's what I find so bracing about the way that you write. But I also wonder how that rubs up against the question of fairness and objectivity.
Yeah.
And if you find it difficult to get some people in Washington to sit down and talk with you,
or even to return your call, yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, very
but
much
also
so.
how you think about that. I mean, I think you're writing. You have something to say. You have a point of view, you have a perspective on contemporary society that is developed, that you've thought about, but it probably comes across to a lot of readers as representing a certain point on the spectrum.
Yeah.
It is not at the center. And
yes, you figured that out.
So I'm just, I'm wondering about how you, as somebody who is, writing in a way that, many of your pieces, most of your work does have what some people would call an agenda. And yet you're obviously, operating under the idea of fairness and trying to come as close as possible to objectivity. But it seems to me there's a potential tension there.
Oh, of course there is.
So tell us how you navigate that.
Well, God, that's a big question.
You've got time.
How do you navigate that? Well, you want to let them speak. You want to let the subject speak for themselves. You want their words to be clear. You want to treat them fairly. But you also you're the author. You're in control of the narrative. So you're writing a story about this subject here, not some subject over there. And but within those parameters, yes, you have to quote them accurately and be fair. And if they don't complete a sentence, you call them back and you didn't complete the sentence. Would you please fix this quote, or whatever it is, this statement. What did you mean when you said this and this, that, and the other? But look, at the end of the day, you're right. There's a lot of people that that don't want to be interviewed by me because they think that I'm going to be that I'm too biased, and they won't return my call. They won't, nothing. And you might be surprised to learn that's people from both parties. It's not. In fact, I should say I had a surprising amount of success interviewing leaders of the conservative movement. When I was writing this book called The Wrecking Crew, which it doesn't make conservatism look all that good, but they were very forthright with me. A lot of them wouldn't talk to me, but the ones who did were very, it was fascinating. But yeah, why do a lot of them just want to be? A lot of people live for publicity. That's part of it. A lot of them think they have an argument that they can make and that it will prevail. They're very confident in what they're saying. A lot of them also think that they have some hidden or not obvious. What would you say? That they and me are on the same page in some way that's not clear, that's not obvious. And you think I'm exaggerating, but this is true, that we're all populists. Because they read my stuff and they're like, yeah, he's this left-wing populist, and I'm this right-wing populist, but at the end of the day, we're both angry about the same kind of things. And, there's some truth to that. Although now that we're going to test this thesis now that Ted Cruz is running for president.
Can I follow up on this question, because it connects to a problem that we wrestle with in this class, and every time we interview, and that is ethics, research ethics and interviewing ethics.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that when you are interviewing somebody who may or may not be a public figure? A public figure has you have different kinds of ethical responsibilities than you do.
Well, there's legal issues. The number one thing that, as a journalist, that we are concerned with, and you will have to be concerned with this too if you're going to publish things, is libel. You have to always keep libel laws in mind. And, people, this is a very litigious country, and people are forever suing one another. And if someone is not a public figure, they have to be treated very differently, with totally with respect, and well. But wait a second, you deserve to you have to respect everyone when you're interviewing them. You have to quote them fairly and accurately, and represent their views accurately. Don't distort what they're saying. Don't take it out of context. Give the context. You want to always do that, but you want to be especially how would I put it? Solicitous when someone is not a public figure. Solicitous, is that the right word? Polite, careful, I should say.
There are two places where that ethics comes into play. One is in the public representation of those views that they've given you in the confidence of an interview setting. And then there's the interview itself.
You have to tell them if you're going to make it public. Oh my goodness, that's that's the basic rules.
I'm thinking about the literally the context of the interview. There are ethical behaviors that you can engage in that I want to hear you talk about the context of the interview.
What do you mean, like tricking someone?
No, I don't. I really mean literally the back and forth. Do you give somebody as much time as they want to tell you what they have to say?
Yeah. If you've got the time, yeah, why not? Sure. Hell yes. I don't know. It's the more words, the better. Some people, especially in Washington, are willing to talk quite a bit. Other people are more taciturn, and are not forthcoming. And some people won't talk to you at all. Some people are very, want to keep to themselves and aren't interested in being part of the, your stupid book that you're working on or whatever it is. No, thank you. But some people just can't shut up, and so you let them go as long as they want. At least that's what I do, unless I've got something. Look, there's two different things. One is when I'm writing a book, or I have loads of time on my hands. Then yes, of course. If I'm on a deadline, that's something very different, and I just need a brief quotation from somebody. Then I ask them. I'll even do that by email sometimes. Would you just tell me whatever, what your opinion is on X, Y, and Z, and they'll do it. Sometimes they won't.
Based on something you said earlier, you said that when you started to write about the advertising culture of the 50s and 60s, you expected it would be one thing, but it turned out to be another thing.
Yeah.
So what were those two things?
I expected it to be like something out of Noam Chomsky. I expected it to be like a propaganda industry. And what I found was that a lot of times these people were very earnest about what they were doing and really thought they were doing something good and right. And I also discovered that a lot of them were very liberal, which I did not expect. And I've since learned that industries have a kind of ideological stance of their own that's built into that's often driven by the position of that industry in the larger economy, and the advertising industry, for whatever reason, is populated with liberals. I didn't know this. This is a complete surprise to me. I thought it was all like the man in the gray flannel suit. I shouldn't say Noam Chomsky, because it's not really Noam Chomsky. It's all those novels that I read, about advertising from the 40s and the 50s, where it's an industry that's about conformity, and it's an industry that's that lives in fear of the client, and all of these kind of stereotypes. And some of them were true in some ways, and in other ways not true at all. I found all sorts of interesting things. It's fascinating what's actually out there in the world and what we don't understand.
When you interview somebody like Cornel West, you have a strong sense of what the opinions are likely to be. Do you approach the interview in any different fashion than you might with a Grover Norquist, whom you mentioned to me earlier?
Yeah.
Are there different, literally, approaches to the conversation itself?
Well, with Cornel West, so I had met him before, I had met him at the New Yorker had a conference here in New York City, and not a conference. It was like a town hall kind of thing, and he and I on in a kind of a conversation, and this was during the financial crisis, while it was actually in progress, while the economy was falling apart. And Cornel West, I thought, was he was a guy who got it without, who really understood what was going on in a way that a lot of other people didn't at the time. And so he intrigued me, and I wanted to sort of catch up with him, see what he thought. And he had also been, let me put it this way, I am fascinated by Obama disillusionment, okay, for a lot of different reasons. One of them is that I myself am a little bit disappointed with Obama, who I had, really high hopes for when he was first elected in 2008. I thought he was the most amazing man in the world, and all that sort of thing, and I was so excited about him being president. But I think that there's more to disillusionment than everyone thinks. I think it's not it's not just some silly matter of high expectations. You expected Superman and you got an ordinary mortal. I think that there's something more to it because it's for a lot of different reasons. It's a product of the historical place that we're at. It's long simmering frustration with the Democratic Party. There's all sorts of different aspects to it. And Cornel West had been an early and vocal supporter of Barack Obama and had changed his mind. And I wanted to see how he would express that and how he would explain it. So it was one in a series of interviews with people who had been were disappointed by Obama. I also did Adolph Reed. I don't know if Adolph Reed ever was a big Obama supporter. I don't recall if he was or not. But he certainly these guys really had to. Anyhow, Cornel West is also he's a wonderful guy to listen to. He has a real way with words, and I love talking to him. But you're asking me, is it different how I approach him? Well, I was on. Yeah, of course. I felt like I knew where he was coming from and was pretty much on the same page. Whereas with Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist is widely regarded as a kind of evil genius figure in Washington D.C. He's very intelligent, very conservative, but also very clever. By the way, it's kind of funny when you think of Grover Norquist and Cornel West at the same time. They're both fun to listen to. Grover Norquist is also very, very clever, and does have really interesting explanations for everything. And so but the things with Grover, I didn't know, or I should say with Grover Norquist, I didn't know where he was going to go with his answers. I had no idea because he's thought all these things out, all of these subjects out, and he's figured out answers for them, and they were things that I would not expect at all. And so I was very surprised by a lot of the things that he said. It's been some years now since I did that interview with Grover, but he said, oh golly, what I'm trying to remember now. Some of the more fascinating things that he said. But he's a libertarian, and so he has a market-based explanation for whatever you care to throw at him, and that takes some real genius. You know what I mean? But maybe you guys don't. I don't know. But it's like it was fascinating. Fascinating. They're both fascinating. Cornel West, it's more, I knew generally the political direction he was going to go in, but I didn't know that he was going to say that, Obama was like going to see Coltrane and winding up with Kenny G. Yeah. It was exactly the right comparison, by the way. I mean, Kenny G's not bad. He's just not Coltrane.
Questions? I know you've interviewed so-called ordinary people as well, not only major political figures, but I assume, like in the book on Kansas, right?
Right.
You talked to a lot of people trying to figure out.
Well, no, the ordinary people, but they were all political. Oh, well, I would talk to ordinary people just on the street, sure, all the time. But the people that I would actually interview on the record, using their names, quoting from them in the book, were all political leaders at one level or another. Now, some of them were very low-level political leaders, like a state senator or something like that, but still public figures. One of the best interviews I did was a guy who, and this guy really really intrigued me. When I first started writing the book, What's the Matter with Kansas, I remember opening up the local newspaper in Kansas City. It's basically a shopper with editorials attached, and the guy who edited it and owned it was writing an editorial denouncing, and this is a wealthy member of the community, a pillar of the community, and he's in his editorial and he's a moderate Republican. In the editorial, he's denouncing some guy who's the leader of the conservative faction of the local Republican Party, and this guy that he's denouncing is a line worker at a soda pop bottling factory. And I thought, oh my, the line worker is being denounced by the pillar of society for wrecking the Republican Party. Well, that's really interesting. I want to dig into that. I want to see what's going on. And so I tracked down the line worker, and he talked to me, and he was a fascinating guy. We talked for quite a while. And he explained why he was interested in why he did what he did, why he was interested. So by the way, one of the things that I found when I was writing this book, this is the thesis of the book in a nutshell, is the leaders of the moderate faction of the Republican Party there in Kansas, but also basically wherever you go in this country of ours, these guys were, to a man, members of the country club, pillars of society, very wealthy people, prominent attorneys, that kind of thing. And then you'd want to go interview the leaders of the conservative faction, and here's a guy that works at the Boeing plant, right? Or here's a guy that's that works in the bottling factory. Here's someone that didn't go to college at all. People from a very different walk of life. And that is sort of where the thesis of the book came from. It's one after another after another, and after a while you're like, there's a pattern here. Well, I mean, obviously. Yeah.
Please describe for us how one gets more high-profile subjects for an interview. How do you go about doing that?
You mean like politicians?
Yeah, like a senator.
Yeah, they have a press agent. They're easy to contact. They're politicians. You got to remember. You got to learn when you're dealing with politicians. You got to remember one thing about them. They're born friend makers. Politicians there's something about them different from ordinary people, which is they love to make friends. And they love to talk to people. Now they know that the press, which is I'm talking about being a journalist here rather than a historian, but the press is their foe, right? These are the two adversaries, politicians and journalists. But at the same time, they also know that the journalist is the only way they're going to get their words out to the public, and so they want to talk to you, but they also want to try to control the message. And so you'd be surprised at how easy it is to get politicians on the phone, to get them to talk to you.
They just want to tell you what.
That's right, and they will keep coming back to their message. You can ask them whatever you want, and they'll they'll answer it however they feel like it. Well, it's a problem, You have to be clever and persistent, and
just
keep at it. But don't be. You don't want to ever be rude or anything like that. That's one of the things I can't stand about the Washington press corps, by the way, is they'll be really rude. They'll ask about things that are stupid. Have you ever seen the kind of questions they ask politicians? I mean, some of them are just unbelievably dumb. Okay, so I've been working on the Clinton administration, writing about the Clinton administration for the last couple of weeks, and I was reading a transcript of the signing ceremony for one of the big bills. I think it was the financial reform thing where they overturned Glass-Steagall. Momentous moment, okay? Momentous, important time in our nation's history. And you read the transcript, and here's Clinton talking about this and that. Here's Larry Summers talking about this and that. And then a journalist pipes up. The journalist gets to ask a question. It's something just absolutely stupid that has nothing to do with what these guys just signed. Absolutely nothing. I forget what it was, but it's just like reading it just made me laugh, And the politicians just have enormous contempt for the sort of Washington press corps. They can't stand them. Yeah, to some degree, that's deserved. I mean, these guys are just like, asking they're always trying to nail them somehow. The question is always, will you confess to this crime? It's like, no, I won't. Next question. It's always about sex scandals too, with Clinton especially. It's always about sex scandals.
Is your preparation as a historian some component of the thing that allows you, like Anthony asks, to get beyond their agenda?
Oh, absolutely.
That background that you can bring to the conversation?
I like to think so. That's that is the one sort of advantage that I have over other journalists, I think, is that I've read so goddamn many books, works of history, so much of this stuff. And you will, you notice all sorts of resonances that other people don't. One of my favorite ones is when I was reading Ann Coulter some years ago. You remember who Ann Coulter was? She was big stuff about 10 years ago. Kind of the right winger of the moment, the flavor of the month back in 2004, 2003. And I was reading one of her books, and it was strikingly reminiscent of stuff that I'd read in. There's a literary critic called Mike Gold who wrote for the Daily Worker. He was a communist, and it wasn't that I'm not implying that she didn't plagiarize him or she has no idea who this guy even is, but she was writing something that was like it was exactly the same to his criticism of Thornton Wilder in 1931, and I like to think that because I'd read so much history, I was able to do something with that. Another one. Ayn Rand. I've read a lot of Ayn Rand. This is going to sound ridiculous, but novelists lift things from history. This is what they do. Novelists base things on reality. That's how they work. And Ayn Rand is writing about. Has anybody read Atlas Shrugged? Y'all should read Atlas Shrugged. This is the conservative Bible of the moment. Okay, it's a novel published in 1957 about an alternative version of the Great Depression. Okay, and in this version of the Great Depression, the workers don't go on strike, the industrialists go on strike, the billionaires go on strike. Fascinating. Okay, so she flips the script and makes up her own version of the Great Depression, and the billionaires bring the world to its knees with their strike. And this is if you conservatives love this novel. They read it, they quote from it. I mean, Paul Ryan used to talk about it all the time. You see people on the subway in Washington reading it, carrying it around with them. Big, thick book. And I was only able to interpret this thing the way I did because I know so much about the Great Depression, but not just the Great Depression. You want to hear an anecdote? Maybe this will put you to sleep. So the climactic moment in Atlas Shrugged is about a train crash, a train wreck, okay? It's a train wreck. A train is, because the economy is falling apart, because we've got this insane left-wing government, they aren't able to change the locomotive on an express passenger train to go through a tunnel in the Rocky Mountains. Because this tunnel, there's something wrong with it. It has to have an electric locomotive take it through the tunnel. But instead, because of the political pull of one of the passengers, they go through it with a coal-burning locomotive, and everybody on board dies. And this is the climactic moment. It's supposed to symbolize the failure of socialism. And I thought, that is, it's the central part of the book. This is where everything changes in the book. And I thought about, like, where on earth did that come from? Train wrecks in tunnels caused by a coal-burning locomotive. There's no way Ayn Rand just dreamed that up on her own. And I dug, and I dug, and I dug, and I found it. I found what she based it on. Do you want to know what it was? Well, it's my theory. There's no way to know for sure unless you get into the Ayn Rand papers, and I didn't go that far. But there was a train wreck in 1910 in the Cascade Mountains, and Ayn Rand describes the tunnel that the wreck happens in, and it's exactly the same tunnel as one of the Cascade Mountains. This tunnel had an engineering fault. The smoke would build up inside of it, so the trains had to be brought through with an electric locomotive. Well, they brought this train through in the wintertime, and it was blocked by an avalanche in front of it. And the train sat there in the winter, and the passengers were terrified. It sat there for day after day, and the snow was building up on the mountains above it, and they thought there was going to be an avalanche. And the passengers mutinied against the crew and said, take us into the tunnel so we won't be killed. by the avalanche that's obviously coming. And the train crew refused to do it. And the avalanche came the next day and killed them all. It's the biggest train disaster in American history. And what's fascinating, and it was one of the first big negligence suits against a railroad. And it was, by the way, decided in the passengers' favor and then overturned by the state Supreme Court, who were all, and it was regarded as a corrupt deal at the time. All forgotten, by the way. And Ayn Rand takes this and flips it, has the passengers mutiny to insist that the train go into the tunnel, and then they die, right? It's the passengers with political pull. And by the way, these passengers tried to use their political pull. They telegraphed to their friends in Seattle saying, please contact our local senator and get him to do something about this. We're trapped here and we're all going to die. And anyhow, and she flipped the script. And when I found this, I was like, oh my God, I figured out this literary mystery, and maybe I'm the only person on planet Earth who gives a damn about this. But and it turns out, by the way, I was the only one on planet Earth that gives a damn about this. Nobody cares. I have a whole appendix about this in Pity the Billionaire, and nobody gives a shit. Anyhow, it's and that's my historical training allowed me to write this thing that nobody gives a damn about. So there you go. Sorry. But you want to know how I did that, by the way? How I got to the bottom of that? By calling people that know a lot about railroading. I was like, have you ever heard of a train accident in a tunnel? Have you ever heard of a long tunnel where the train couldn't go through it? And after about 5 phone calls to like the editor of Railroading magazine, and then somebody else, and then somebody else, they're like, yes, I have heard of that. There's somebody that's written a history of train accidents. Can you believe that? Yeah, and it's a pretty good book, too. It's called Death Rode the Rails. A history of train accidents. More interesting than you might think.
Many of the students in the room are engaged, they're all engaged in their own oral history projects. And they're all finding it relatively difficult to get, one of the reasons I think Marshall asked the question about how you get to politicians is it has to do with, they're finding it relatively difficult to find people to speak with, right? There is some reticence on the part of folks. What advice might you give a beginning journalist if you were talking to somebody who's just starting out in the profession? These are historians, but the position is relatively similar about cracking that door. Not with the senator, who clearly has an agenda, but with the average individual.
Average people are going to be more, obviously more, open to talking to an undergraduate in history. That people are going to want to know if their words are going to be published. That's the main thing they're going to want to know. They're going to want to know if it's going to be made public, and and how careful they need to be in talking to you. And you'll find people, like when you point a camera at them, like we have right now, they'll clam up. They don't. Do you guys ever read Studs Terkel? I mean, here's the master of the form. So I actually knew Studs Terkel in Chicago in his back in the 90s. He was a great man. And here's a guy who would write entire books that are just interviews with people. And I remember in one of the books, and some of them are like his book about the Depression is fantastic. There's a book about social class in America called Division Street, USA. Wonderful guy. But so when I was writing about Pity the Billionaire, I went back and read his book about the Depression. And, it's fantastic. And he interviews everyone from movie stars down to, guys who were in the bonus army, which is like there were protesters, right? Or guys who went on strike in the 30s. Anyhow, he would take pains to make them feel at ease. People are often very nervous about having their words recorded and then published, printed somewhere where the whole world can read it. It's a little frightening, And yet that's what we have to do, right? That's what oral history is. You want to get average people out there talking about their experience. And he would have various things he would do to put people at ease. Part of it is, don't use a conspicuous microphone. Don't do that. Don't point a camera at them. I mean, it's okay, Jonathan. It's all right. Here, because we're not doing oral history. We're just fooling around. But when we go out in the field to do the real thing, because we deal in print, in words, not so much in videotapes. Although maybe you should start videotaping. Maybe that's the way to do it.
We have some ambivalence because we've encountered exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, they don't like to be
It's
videotaped.
An eye or a
Yeah.
thigh in the
Yeah.
room.
Yeah.
People don't like to be videotaped in my experience.
Yeah,
personally.
people also open up over time. We were talking about if you try to keep the interview short, people often get much better as they go along. You know, they'll start out rocky, really short answers, they'll answer yes or no, and then as you talk to them for a while, they'll open up more and more and give you more detailed responses. But it sounds to me like your problem is. Oh, and by the way, also always be prepared. Have your list of questions, but also be ready to make stuff up on the fly, like things to ask them about, because it's all going to change once you hear their answer. Everything is going to change. You're going to want to ask. You'll hear some word that you weren't familiar with, some term of art. You'll want them to explain it. The interview is always going to wander away from your script. That's always what happens.
Studs Terkel beautifully called it a dance.
Did he? Okay, yeah. You guys really should read him. He's fascinating. He was one of our one of the great Chicagoans. I love that guy. What else can I tell you about it?
Scott.
Yeah, just a question actually about listening, because it seems like we're at this moment in our society when people have a really hard time listening to each other, particularly across political.
Oh my God, do they ever? Yeah.
And I don't know if you have an explanation for that. I mean, it seems like we live in a culture where it's easier than ever to access other people's opinions, and yet we
Also
have
easier
less
to
and
dismiss
less,
them.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. We have less and less tolerance for it. But it seems like the art of the interviewing, the kind of oral history that these students are doing, teaches a kind of attention, right?
Also,
And
a
patience
suspension
that we don't have.
of a suspension of
Judgment.
yeah. You have to let the person say their piece. And you're right about the society that we're living in. Look, when I started out, I knew I wanted to be a newspaper columnist when I was in 6th grade. I also knew I wanted to be a historian, and that these two things were not necessarily the same. Those are my ideals. This is what I wanted to do. And but being a newspaper columnist was obviously the glamour job at the Kansas City Star or whatever it was. That was obviously what you wanted to shoot for. And when I finally got my chance, of course, I took it. But what's funny is that we all want to be that now. Everyone wants to be the columnist. They all want to be, David Brooks or Tom Friedman laying down the law from the heights of the op-ed page and having millions of readers, and nobody wants to be the guy that just goes out there and runs the tape recorder. And by the way, that's the other risk, and we didn't really go into this, of being a stenographer to power, which is this is something that we say in Washington all the time when someone is just interviews the president or a powerful politician or something like that and just accepts what they say and doesn't ask tough questions. It's just a stenographer for their whatever it is that they're saying. And I don't have a lot of respect for people who do that either. Your questions have to be critical. You have to get them to work. You have to get them to think. You have to get them to open up and to reveal, not just to, do their talking points. You can download their talking points. That's a big nothing. You want them to open up. Being a stenographer to power is what you don't want to be. But you also don't want to be some kind of crazy partisan. That's a style that you see more and more often now that I just can't stand. The world is such an interesting place, and often you will find people who have very different views than your own are just as well-meaning as you are, which is shocking. I know, it's amazing, but it's true. It's very true. Those people I interviewed in the Kansas book, I couldn't disagree with these people more, but they really thought they were doing the right thing. Okay, this is so in the circles that I'm in, it is often. I mean, I write about conservatism. I've written 3 books about the conservative movement, and 4 if you count One Market Under God. And what I often find nowadays is my colleagues. They can't stand these people that I'm writing about. And they just want to brush him off. He's racist. He's sexist. He's some kind of a voice for oligarchy. He's just and that doesn't really get at it. That's not good enough in my view. There's so much more out there. There's so much more going on. I mean, if that was all you were offering people, you wouldn't get anywhere. I mean, maybe you'd get some, I don't know, you'd do all right in Alabama or something. I shouldn't even say that. Even that is a cruel, wrong thing to say. But the world is much more interesting than we think it is.
Why have we lost our sense of that? I mean, why is it that everybody wants to be David Brooks and nobody wants to be Studs Terkel? Why is it that we are so dismissive, but we have a hard time really...
By the way, and Studs had a point of view. I got to remember about Studs. Studs was a big time left winger, but he interviewed people of every political persuasion, and some really great interviews too. Why are we like that? I think the internet is doing that to us. I think we think it's so easy to get the facts now. You just Google them. We think it's that we have a lot of we're dismissive about that part of the job, that part of the task. I think I don't really have a good answer for that. And you know what? I imagine if I looked into it, I'm probably pretty guilty of driving us all in that direction. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be, a David Brooks type. Somebody over here.
Yeah. When you say stenographer for power, so let's say an ordinary person, what do you, in what ways do you deviate from his own narrative? You know what I mean? Like should you kind of make him...
Should you challenge him?
Yeah, what ways?
I think so, but gently. You don't call them names or anything like that. The idea of the kind of interview I'm describing is not to convert the person to a different point of view or to win them over or anything like that. It's to get their opinion and understand why they did what they did, why they reacted the way they did, why they thought what they thought.
Especially in a traumatic situation or something.
So you're talking about
let's say a Holocaust survivor.
Oh yeah.
Let's say like a 9/11 survivor or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you're asking them questions, how challenging can you get?
How challenging? That is I don't actually have an answer for that. I've never interviewed someone like that. Because I know people can be are very sensitive.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. What do you think?
We've been wrestling with this one all semester, to be honest. Many of the projects have taken on an angle that touches on trauma in one way or another. And my approach typically has been to allow the person as much digital tape, as they want to take. And if they're making assumptions or assertions that not to be true, you're still the historian in the room, and you have the obligation and the right to
challenge them.
To challenge them.
Sure.
But as you just said, gently and probingly. But ultimately, in the product, the thing that's the other end of the interview, you make your own claims.
Well, because we assume that they know the facts as well as you do, and you want them to address. You want them to explain why they have taken this fact and reacted to it in this unusual way, or why they've understood it in the way that they have. There's always something interesting there. As to you obviously don't want to this is not a subject that I'm I do this kind of political stuff and interviews about business subjects and things like that. So I've never interviewed someone in the circumstances that you describe. But I guess what I would do is sort of gently lead them and see what they themselves want to say about it. I wouldn't push them into something like that. I don't know. I'm thinking a show that nobody remembers this anymore. Do you remember the BBC's World War II series? So classic example of this kind of history. And they interviewed Nazis. They interviewed members of the British cabinet. They interviewed Holocaust survivors. They interviewed guys who were horribly wounded, during the war. People from all walks of life, all the sort of different social ranks. And there you can't avoid talking about, trauma. Good Lord. But by the way, it's something that you may want to watch at some point. Fascinating. And a lot of it's in I was showing it to my children.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
I actually own the DVDs, but it's in color, a lot of it, and they're like, wow, because they never think of World War II as being in color. It's always something in the distant past. I had a professor when I'll talk about that some other time. He told me, actually I will talk about it. Yeah, I'll talk about it. He encouraged me to write, is when I wanted to do cultural and intellectual history, and he wanted me to do a history of color. A history of the transition from black and white to color, in TV, in movies, in magazines. And I was like, no, that's like, no, I want to do something like real, and really, yeah. But now I look back at it, that was a great idea. I should have done it. What a brilliant idea that was.
Thinking of photography.
Yeah. But how it changes people's perceptions of things.
And of the past itself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But it's that barrier. It's drawn a barrier between the present and the past. And, and I meet people all the time that can't watch black and white movies. For some reason, their mind they can't absorb it. And it's like, for me, that's all there is, man. I don't watch the color ones.
It's a famous dialogue in Calvin and Hobbes, between Calvin and his father. He says, why is it that all the old photographs are black and white? And his father says, because the world was in black and white. I don't remember how it's resolved. It goes on for quite a while. I was thinking, though, more seriously when you were talking, that if you listen or if you watch television programs nowadays, especially on news channels, where people talk about serious issues, there is so little listening that goes on. People interrupt each other, they cut each other short, they never ever admit that they made a mistake about anything, or that they rethought something, or they once had a different opinion, and so they model the most horrendous behavior to one another. And the same thing is true, with a lot of the radio commentators, Rush Limbaugh being the worst of them all, but there's lots of them.
Oh, he's not the worst.
No, he's not the worst. He's just the worst that I've heard. There's Glenn Beck.
Yeah.
Crazy. Sometimes, when you mentioned about the BBC, sometimes on the BBC news they have a program called Hard Talk. You ever see that?
Yeah.
Where they really do ask hard questions, and they sit still to listen to their answers.
Yeah.
Which I think is actually a discipline, and it has a kind of a moral aspect to it that people don't think about very much. That it requires a certain humility to listen to somebody with respect when he's saying something that you think is dead wrong. Partly it's humility, and partly it's courage, because I do feel that a lot of this kind of conversation is driven by the dominant mode of contemporary discourse in the last 15 years, which is terror.
Which is what?
Terror. Everybody's scared all the time. And after 9/11, it seems to me that in most people's houses, the television was on 24 hours a day for a couple of years at least, in case the terror level went up beyond whatever.
It's funny what you say about the screaming at each other. Do you remember when that started? It was the DC talk shows. The McLaughlin Group, and that became and they did that deliberately. God, where was I when they encouraged us? I was on who's the comedian, Bill Maher, and they told us to do that, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that that's what I was supposed to do. I wound up looking like a fool. I was on that show. I didn't say anything because as soon as I would show the slightest hesitation, somebody would start talking over me, and I'd be like, "Oh yes, go ahead," and I lost. I lost the program or whatever if you kept score on. And of course, someone does.
Did they give prizes at the end?
No. And you know what's funny is that once the and I really liked the host, Bill Maher. I was very impressed by him. He made up stuff on the spot that was really clever. He was a genius, But it was a good conversation once the cameras were off. It was a great conversation then.
So that happened. They do that on purpose, goofing it up like that.
They, apparently everybody else got the memo but me. I didn't understand that that's what I was supposed to do, and I didn't really get it. But that is what everybody else was doing on the show. They do that. The hell with it. I hate those kind of programs. And I've been on a bunch of them. Have you ever seen what's that? This show, CNBC. This is the worst. They have something called the Octobox. 8 people yelling at each other. Yeah.
Speaking of along that, I was wondering, in this conversation, if we don't listen anymore, sort of the art of listening, the art of speaking, and this is slightly out of left field, but one, in addition to sort of the punditocracy yelling at each other for ratings, another source that is blamed for that on television is reality TV.
Yeah.
But I would like to suggest that perhaps reality television is a form of public history. It's certainly one of the things that people listen to and engage with these people's lives.
Yeah.
And then it's often paralleled by a lot of popular YouTubers who do form supportive communities of listening and talking in a sustained way that we don't see in official political discourse.
Yes, that's
and,
right.
I mean, and that's a completely different domain, but as a place where listening happens in public and through media, that seems to be one of the places where it is happening.
Well, I wouldn't. Reality TV is not where I would. That's not where I would go with that. But
not real, but
the thing that's remarkable to me about reality TV is the stuff that people will do to have a camera pointed at them to be on television. It is truly amazing. The depths to which people will sink. But YouTube is the most amazing invention for what we do, and let me tell you why. So when the Tea Party movement started in 2009, I was working on. I was a columnist for the Wall Street Journal at the time, and I was, as I mentioned earlier, the Depression era is my is the sort of era where I feel most comfortable, and I've read all the books and blah 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 blah, and I kept waiting for protest movements to start. I want to see the protest movement when it starts. I want to be there. I want to watch it unfold, and less than a month after Obama was inaugurated, one of my friends calls me and says, that movement that you're waiting for is here. They're meeting tomorrow down at Lafayette Park, across the street from the White House. And I go down there, it's the first Tea Party rally. They've been mobilized, called to life by Rick Santelli. Do you remember this? And well, I'm not going to. He was a business commentator who had this call to arms from the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade. It was the most extraordinary thing, and he called for a protest movement, and here they are. They materialize in Washington, D.C. And I went down and I went to it, and if you go back and look at the YouTube accounts of it, I'm there with my little stupid notepad writing down, taking down people's words. But what's great about YouTube is not that moment, but all the other Tea Party rallies that happened all over America. These guys were always filming themselves. And they were proud of their signs. They'd have these kind of provocative signs, always trying to piss you off in some way. And they'd be photographing one of their signs, filming the event, filming the speakers. And so you have these little-known local politicians speaking at these things, and saying extraordinary things, very revealing things often. And it's all up on YouTube. And so it became, this is the greatest thing ever invented. If you want to track the development of a movement like this, and I was able to do it largely because of that invention. It was fantastic. Like, say, you had a congresswoman from upstate New York. I forget her name, but I went on YouTube and looked at like 20 of her appearances before audiences. Like, here she is at a retirement home, and she somehow manages to anger the retirees. Yelling at her, and she got elected, but she said the most outrageous things, and it all goes into the book. It's fantastic. It's wonderful material. It's all unscripted. The fact that people are filming these events all over America and putting it up on YouTube, I just hope someone somewhere is cataloging it all. This is the problem with the internet. There's great stuff on the internet. The problem is it all goes away after a while. So do y'all know who the Democratic Leadership Council is? It's an organization that Bill Clinton was the chairman of. This was the group that moved the Democratic Party to the right, or to the center, as they like to put it. And I used to cross swords with them all the time. I'd argue with them in public and this kind of thing, and I'd criticize them very often. And they had an enormous internet presence. They had a magazine. They had 2 magazines. They had a blog. They had all this stuff. It's all deleted now from the internet. So I went back to check on it the other day, and it's all gone. And fortunately for me, there's some people that have archived everything that was ever on the internet, and so I'm able to, after a little bit of digging, to find this stuff. But I don't imagine there's anything like that for YouTube. Stuff just disappears and it's gone. But while it's there, it's the most wonderful thing in the world.
What about your projects, guys? Do your projects touch on the subjects we've talked about? The questions of empathy, ethics, truth? Are there ways in which specifically Mr. Frank could help advise us as we go forward? Well, Marshall, keep going. Go ahead.
It's unrelated. What do you think about Wikipedia? Because YouTube is, right, the spoken word.
Yeah.
Wikipedia is more like...
Well, it's okay for me. It's always a good starting point, but don't believe what you read there. I used to, at some point early on, there's a Wikipedia entry for me, and at some point early on, I decided that I would never touch it, and it accreted the most outrageous falsehoods, all sorts of like nutty stuff about me. I finally did get involved. They put the names of my children in it, and so I went on there and deleted that. But otherwise, I let it go, and it's just filled with lies, and I didn't put any of them there. It's just, well, I mean, maybe it's gone now, but anyhow. So with Wikipedia, it's often a good starting point, but don't let that be your, don't let that be the final source for anything. Yeah.
When you interview someone, do you, I mean, like a group of people that you were thinking in your head, do you have like the same question for everyone?
A what?
When you're gonna have an interview for,
Yes.
let's say, 5 different people, do you have?
Do I have the same questions for
yeah,
everyone?
for each one, or it depends like the topic that you
Ooh,
want?
where it's a whole bunch of different people?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on, I guess, if you're interviewing them together or separately. But sure, if they've all, if you're asking about the same experiences. But like I said earlier, you want to have a starting point, but you also want to be able to roll with it. And when they say something, you want to be able to play off of that and build off of that and go to something else. And you want to have a general outline ready to go, but you also want to be able to. And sure, I'll often have the same, outline. I'll be asking the same questions to all sorts of different people, but they'll respond in all sorts of different ways, and you want to go with them, wherever they're taking you.
I got one. So what has been your most memorable interview experience? The moment perhaps when things went most terribly wrong or right?
Oh, that's a good question. Because most of them have gone pretty well. I have to say it's Grover Norquist. I interviewed him at this fancy restaurant in Washington, D.C. He's not the kind of guy you'd ever expect to interview, and he's very clever, and I actually kind of liked him. That's the really, I didn't expect that, to feel sympathetic towards him. But here's a man who has made his way in the world armed with his wits, which is sort of what all of us as intellectuals want to do. And he's done it, and he's very smart. And I felt a lot more sympathetic with this guy than you'd think. Actually, now that I say that, I felt that way about a lot of the people that I interviewed. And these are people that I disagreed with profoundly on issues. I remember I interviewed a guy in Wichita who had organized the anti-abortion protests in Wichita, which were, when I was growing up, that was not even an issue in Kansas in the 80s. And then in the 90s, everything changed, and it changed in Wichita. The Operation Rescue descended on the city of Wichita and turned it into this, unleashed this battle on because they had these, abortion clinics in Wichita, and they did these massive protests in front of all of them. And when I remember when this happened, because my friends and I were like, this is Kansas. That's never gonna work. That's ridiculous, bordering on insulting. And it did work, and it caught on. And then, and so I went and interviewed 15 years after that happened, or I guess more like 12 years after that happened, I interviewed one of the guys who had done this. And this is a cause where I disagree profoundly with what they were doing. But there's a certain inventiveness and cleverness and what do you call it when he's determination, a certain resolve that this guy had, to put this thing over. And he was describing this to me, and you know what? It was fascinating. It was fascinating. And like I say, an issue where I am, completely on the other side of the issue. There's, in fact, a bunch of people that I interviewed who were like that. But I'm kind of done with that subject now. So now I just call up academics and I ask them. It's like, well, blah. Yeah. Here, this guy has a question. Lay it on me.
Who was the best interview you ever did, and who was the worst interview you ever did?
Oh golly. That is hard. I should have prepared better for this, I've done all sorts of interviews where I didn't use anything from it, where nothing came, where no they didn't say anything interesting. That happens all the time, especially with politicians. They just repeat the talking points. I'm sorry to say, it also happens with academics all the time. Where they just tell you what they've said in their book, and you're like, yeah, but come on, say something juicy, and they never do. The best one was that Cornell West one was pretty good. The Elizabeth Warren interview that I did on Salon was pretty good. I was very proud of that. We were talking earlier about I met a guy in Kansas who claimed to be the Pope, and that guy was fascinating. And I would say that was one of the best interviews I ever did. Except for that he's not, he's a public figure. He's written books and he's out in the public eye all the time. He hasn't really gotten very far in his mission to convince the world that he's the Pope. But man, he was really interesting. He was, and he's like many of these people that I'm describing. This is a guy where I wasn't raised a Catholic, but I know something about it. And this is not a project that I'm in sympathy with. Let's put it that way. And he was fascinating. Because he'd worked it all out, mentally, philosophically. Philosophical is not the word. He'd worked it all out in terms of Catholic doctrine, and that was really interesting. He wasn't a crank, right? He had figured it all out. No. I tape everything, and I tape it with what's now old technology. I use a mini disc, and the reason I use that is because when I used to do radio. I used to do college radio back when college radio was a big deal. It was a lot of fun, and mini disc was by our standards that was the best. That was the best way to record something. So I still use the damn things. Do you guys even know what that is? Mini disc? Well, it's one of these guys who I didn't use anything from. I don't know. There are many of those. Many lousy interviews. I don't know.
Well, let me sum up the two things I'm going to take away. The first is have empathy for your interviewees.
Yeah.
That's one thing I think
that's very important. Yeah.
Knowing. And the second is never turn off your microphone too early.
Yeah, let it run. Let it run. Let them talk. Let them, go. And be quick on your feet. That's the other thing you always have to remember. Be quick on your feet with these guys. And you will get in the door, by the way. They all have PR departments. They all want to talk to you. They just want to know where it's going to appear. They want to make sure that that you're not going to, zap them, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Let me just recommend to your attention this photo that we gave you, which lists all of the events this week. And I want to underline two in particular. On Wednesday evening at 5:30 in Tanger Auditorium, Thomas Frank will be giving a lecture called Against Creativity. It's a very interesting title.
I bet you wonder what I mean by that.
Right.
You're going to find out.
And on Thursday in Whitman Auditorium at 12:30, Thomas Frank and Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, who was also a very distinguished columnist for the New York Times, will be having a public dialogue in Whitman Auditorium on basically
The Obama legacy.
the disappointments of the
Yeah.
Obama administration.
I think it's going to be, Krugman is going to be pro and I'm going to be con or something like that. We'll figure it out when we get there.
I don't know, he doesn't seem too sold on it either. Actually. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
12:30 in Whitman Auditorium. There's plenty of room, so come and bring your Sunday school teacher.